Hi, this is Aryeh Cohen-Wade. I'm the host of Culture Determined, and I have a brief but important announcement. This is the final episode of Culture Determined that will appear on the main Blogging Heads YouTube channel. The show is spinning off onto its own independent YouTube channel, and so if you want to keep on watching it on YouTube, the best way to do that is to subscribe. So the link will be below on both YouTube and on Blogging Heads. The show will continue to appear on the Blogging Heads homepage and on the Blogging Heads podcast feed. But if you want to keep on watching on YouTube, please smash that subscribe button. Thanks so much. Hi, welcome to Culture Determined on Blogging Heads. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and we have a very special episode for you today with an unusual guest. And that guest is the person who plays the character of William Shakespeare on Twitter. So, can you please introduce yourself, Will, or Shakespeare, or however you want to be referred to?
Yeah, people call me Bill. People call me Will, William. I get called a lot of things on Twitter, but Twitter handle is WWM_Shakespeare, and I play the character of William Shakespeare on Twitter.
Well, thank you for taking the time. And you said you've never done a podcast or anything like this before, and you are maintaining, anonymity through this. So thanks for coming on. So I guess
Sure.
I don't even remember when I started following your account, but it's a very enjoyable account. And so how would you describe it? How would you describe the account to someone who isn't familiar with it?
So the account tweets, I don't know, maybe 8-9 times a day on average, and it only speaks in the words of William Shakespeare. So that's the one rule that I set up early on, was that it's going to be mostly quotes, almost all quotes from either the plays or the sonnets, and so it's just a random snippet of a Shakespeare line that comes across during the day. And I'll say random with a grain of salt. Right.
Because sometimes you do tweet things that seem to have a, alignment, concurrence, rhyme, or something with things that are happening in the world. And we'll talk about that maybe in a little bit. But
yes.
How did you, so how did this start? Why did you decide to start this project?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of something I just did on a lark. So way back in the day, you probably remember this, but there were, in the early days of Twitter, there were a whole bunch of Twitter clones out there, and just a lot of different platforms that were doing kind of the same thing. And I got hooked on one called Plurk.
I don't remember that one, but that's funny.
It doesn't matter. It's still going. I think it's really popular in Asia. But anyhow, I started this account over on Plurk, and it just did it as a lark. I thought, well, this would be kind of fun. Why don't I see how this goes? And I liked it. It was fun. And I found out, I realized I was having a good time by doing this. And I thought, well, I'll just keep it up, and maybe I'll take it over to Twitter. And so this account actually started primarily as just a Plurk feed. If you dig back into the archives of this account, you'll see that it looks a little different because it starts with, I can't explain why, but anyway, it was all a Plurk feed, and that's how it got going.
Interesting. Okay, I wonder, I'm now thinking about some sort of alternate history where Plurk, became the dominant platform instead of Twitter, and I think that would have to be a better world than the one we live in currently, because Twitter has done a lot of things to make the world worse, I think, even though I'm on it all the time and am addicted to it.
Right.
But one reason I like your account is sort of there's so much negativity. There's so much negativity out there these days. And a lot of that negativity appears on social media. And the things that get retweeted are often people being mean, people saying something crazy.
Right.
Dunking, quote tweeting on someone dunking. And then, so your feed is like this little oasis of, not, I wouldn't say positivity, but profundity or something, or like these are the actual words of Shakespeare. And that's, almost guaranteed to be better than 99.9% of anything else in the world. So it's a little respite, I guess.
Yeah. And thanks for that. I mean, and so the account interacts with a lot of people, and people will tweet at me, and I like to tweet back at them, and I just think there's just not you can never be too kind, I guess, is really where my head is, and that's kind of how I approach things. Now you might also look at the account and see that maybe I'm commenting on things that are going on or subtweeting somebody, and that's maybe not always quite so kind. And I'll own that too. But yeah, I just think I agree with you. I mean, I just think that Twitter can be such a harsh and mean place, and it's just all about it's all about scoring a couple of quick points for a lot of folks, and I think there's just a lot of room for something else. And I do try to put that out there, and I do it. We're all doing this for different reasons, right? And I mean, it's as much for me as it is for everybody else. Like I like to put that stuff out there. At least I like to think I do.
Yeah, I think you're successful, and so so there's some other there's plenty of people who are doing something along these lines on Twitter. So there's a Moby Dick account that is somewhat similar to yours.
Yeah, I love that account.
And you interact with that account sometimes. And then there's just I think someone has at Shakespeare, and that person does Shakespeare posts, but not in the way you're doing it, where it really is like you are using the Shakespearean canon as almost entirely your sole text. And sometimes you'll like take a meme or something and play with it that way. And so there was this very meme that I was joking. This is like a real sort of like bargain basement meme that was going around with these photos of the cast of this movie. Was it not Wes Anderson? Is that who it was? It was Bill Murray and and Timothy Chalamet, and they were all wearing different outfits. It became this meme, and people were just like, okay, these are the 4 different fashion magazines or something, or 4 different colleges in California. And so, but you took this quote from what is it Jacobs? Who gave that line that you
So yeah, I knew you were going to do this to me. So let me just pause at this moment in this podcast and say this: I am not a Shakespeare scholar. I am a guy with a Twitter, and and so let's don't confuse that. Now, having said that, I've been doing this for a long time. I've certainly seen a lot of the plays. I've read a lot of the plays, almost all the plays. I've seen the text over and over again, so I'm very familiar with it. But boy, for me to come up with what that line came from now, I can't.
Okay, well, yeah. So you're not okay. So I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but
you're good.
So yeah. So my background is I was an English major in college, got really into Shakespeare. I wrote my senior thesis about Shakespeare, and then at that point I had read about 20 of the plays. So I figured, well, I might as well read the rest because I'm like sort of over the hump already. And then over the next 4 or 5 years, I read the rest, even the really boring ones like the Henry VI trilogy and and so on and so forth. So I completed the canon and I haven't really reread any of them since then. But and then just enjoyed Shakespeare as a seeing performances and so forth. And yeah, so but you use this line that's like it's about, I'm trying to remember, it's about like how to make a debate. Anyway, it just says like the first, the retort courteous, the second, the quip modest, the third, the reply churlish, the fourth, the reproof valiant. And so so you're playing with memes. Okay, so so if you are so you're not a Shakespeare scholar, probably an actual Shakespeare scholar would not do a project like this because they're like, writing articles that a dozen people will read in some obscure journal or something. Exactly. So why was this why this project instead of doing, many other things one could do online? Like, I don't know, pretending. I remember there was like a time where a snake escaped from the Bronx Zoo or something, and there was a bunch of Bronx Zoo escaped snake parody accounts that popped up immediately, and they're like, oh, I'm going to Times Square and other sort of stuff. And then so that was like a cool thing to do on Twitter, cool quote unquote, 10 or so years ago. Well, why Shakespeare in particular?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll tell on myself a little bit and tell you too. This wasn't my first or only character account that I had. It wasn't the only one I had on Plurk. I had another one that was maybe even more popular for a time, and I was impersonating. I impersonated a couple of very famous politicians, and just played that as a role. And those were fun, and I had a good time with those. But those are fleeting, right? I mean, they're going to come and go as those people go. But so I thought about it. I thought, well, what would be fun that wouldn't be like that? And it was this. And I thought, well, this would be really cool. It would be a fun way to access, something literary. I'm a literary person too. I did a lot of, reading and loved English and all of that. And so I thought this would be a great way to do that, and maybe, put some stuff out there into these platforms that, might be that you wouldn't otherwise see. Was what I was thinking back in, whatever it was, 2009 when I started doing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as, is it Ben Jonson wrote in the dedicatory poem to Shakespeare, he's not of an age, but of all time or something.
Yeah.
Very close to that.
Yeah.
So he's, he was, born over 400 years ago, and we're still talking about him. So that's not the case for many people. Okay. So how do you decide generally? I mean, you can not give away your secrets if you don't want to. Well, let's say
I knew this question was coming. Go ahead and ask.
How do you decide what? So when you're not commenting obliquely on current events, what are you thinking about when it comes to selecting what you're going to put out there?
Yeah. Okay. So here's a little window into the secret sauce. Yeah, if you can call it that. So, I mean, here's the truth. I mean, really, the account has always been about me and what's on my mind, and that's just This is my social media account. I don't really have a social media presence other than this. I mean, I used to be on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook anymore. I just don't do that. And so if I'm doing something or thinking about something, it will be the thing that prompts me to find the quote that tells you what's on my mind. So literally this account is a years-long window into that, for better or for worse.
Okay, that's interesting. That isn't what I thought your answer would be. So if you are, in somewhat of a down mood, maybe you'll look for a quote about how, something Hamlet's saying about how, unprofitable seem to him all the uses of the world or something like that.
Right. Absolutely.
So part of, why people still continue to read Shakespeare is he had this sort of like capaciousness, and it does seem like he sort of commented on everything. I used to have a theory, I don't know if I still believe it, that like every person, you could sort of like define them as either a Shakespeare character or some combination of Shakespeare characters, especially sort of public people who have maybe a flatter persona. And it was like, I even back in 2016, I tried writing a piece that would link. This would have been like in March or April, the people who, all the bozos who were running for the GOP nomination, and assign each one a Shakespeare character and be like, what does this reveal about them? And I think I only did like one or two, and then I gave up. But it does sort of seem like you can think about people or events or something, and it is sort of like there's something within Shakespeare that is related to it or comments upon it or embodies it or something.
Yeah, your source material may have been a little two-dimensional for a Shakespeare character.
Right. I'm trying to remember. So the one I remember is I said Ted Cruz was like the Duke in Measure for Measure.
Yeah, okay. I see it.
It's sort of like
I see it.
Moralist, but inside, roiling within him is, the heart of a, lascivious person or something.
Right.
Putting up the front of like utmost morality.
Yep.
And then I think I said I'm trying to remember. I had something with Rubio, but I honestly can't remember what it was. Maybe it doesn't always work. But anyway, it is sort of like, there's something within Shakespeare that seems universal.
Yeah, but your bigger point, I think, is right. I mean, it's all there. It's whatever you're thinking about or whatever is happening. It's there somewhere. Is, I think, true. I mean, and sometimes I have to not edit, but sometimes I have to crop a sentence or something, and I'm, and that changes the the meaning of the original text, but that's not really what this account is about, right? I mean, people all the time. The biggest request I get is, will you please start citing your site so that I can tell you where they're coming from, and maybe that's for a couple of reasons, but including to get the context. And my kind of answer to that is no. The context is you and us, and the context is all around us. I mean, I'm just taking this stuff. I'm very deliberately taking this out of context, right? I mean, right. That's most of the time. Sometimes that's not true, but most of the time it is. And I don't know where I was coming with that, but
yeah, that's interesting. And that so there was a similar account. I think I'm remembering, 5 or more years ago, and then more recent time on Twitter. There was someone who was doing at least something somewhat similar. And then, they had sort of a companion account, and it would sort of give the actual background or something, or this is where it came from. Does this ring a bell?
Yeah, well, so the Moby Dick account either does that or has a companion account that does that. So every time there's a Moby Dick quote that goes out on the Moby Dick account, if you look in the thread, it will give you the source of the account. Or of the quote.
Okay, yes, maybe this is what I'm thinking of. Yeah, Where is Moby Dick is the account.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
a bot or something, or I don't know if this is the same person runs it or something. There's also an account that tweets every time the New York Times uses a word it's never used before. Do you know this one?
No, I haven't, but that's fantastic. I'm going to look for it.
So I don't know how there must be some. I don't know how they are put this together or whether it's actually accurate, but so. This neologism's always flowing around. And so, it will just tweet the word. And then sometimes that will go viral if it's a funny word or a weird word or something. And then I think usually there's a reply that will, it's called New York Times out of context, I think.
New York Times, okay.
And then it's the companion account is New York Times in context or something. And that tweets the link to the article. So you can check yourself to see that, New York Times actually did print some silly word, like chuggy. I don't know if you followed the whole chuggy.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about because I follow this account. I just didn't. I just didn't look at it closely enough to understand that it.
Maybe I'm wrong, but at least I think that that's what the aim of it is. But I don't know what corpus they're drawing from to decide how they decide that a word actually is new. So maybe I'm misunderstanding it. But yeah, so there's So you do not list the line.
No.
In the play and the act in the scene.
Right.
And that's a conscious choice. That's interesting. So, I mean, obviously if you highlight it and Google it, then you'll probably find it. And SparkNotes has, usually
the other thing. I mean, that's the other, and I know, again, I try to be kind, but kind of the other answer to that is you're reading this on the internet.
Right.
It's just not that hard to find, But I appreciate why people want it there, and I guess it's kind of funny. I guess if I had tech skills, which I don't, I mean, I could probably do a bot that would just respond to every tweet that would say, "Here's where it comes from." I mean, some of the problem would be on the really sometimes I'll do really short quotes, right, and they're going to show up hundreds of times. Just little things on there, and that would make it tough to do that. And the same thing happens from Where is Moby Dick or whatever. You'll see that on the replies. It'll be okay, here's all the different places that they found that in the book. Mm-hmm. Because that's it. Sometimes depending on what I'm quoting, it could come from anywhere, come from a lot of places. I mean,
right. So so one thing you tweeted something. I assume it was during the England Italy soccer match that said "Oh England." And so maybe is there only one occurrence of "Oh England" somewhere in Shakespeare, or there's a dozen as
I think there's only one actually. I think there's only one that goes exactly like that.
Okay, so. That's funny. Okay, so you do sometimes do stuff like that, and then and then another time. So So during the Trump era. It seems sometimes. So one thing that Shakespeare is famous for is insults, and you can buy a coffee mug that has Shakespearean insults on them.
Yes.
And, so something that is the case about Donald Trump is that you can sort of just list some insults, and they probably do apply to him. And so you had one when I was looking Googling your account and stuff. So you tweeted He's a most notable coward, an infinite and endless liar, an hourly promise breaker, the owner of no one good quality.
One good quality. Yep, I know the quote well.
Okay, so what is that actually in reference to in Shakespeare?
Oh my gosh, it's from one of the comedies. It's one of the early, I can't remember if it comes from As You Like It or which one it comes from. Is it As You Like It? You're nodding your head. Is it As You Like It?
Well, that would make sense.
Okay,
but yeah, okay, so
yeah.
But just a strange fact about Donald Trump is you could just list a bunch of insults, and he's such a horrible person that it does seem like they apply to him. So you sort of doing stuff like that, and then if Trump did something especially bad, you'd be like, there'd be a line saying like "arrest the rogue" or something. I don't know. So I that was sort of part of the popularity of the account during the last couple of years.
I'll just point out that the word dotard appears in the Shakespeare canon. Just apropos of nothing, I'll just point that out.
Okay, so there was some editorial. So there's some editorializing.
There's absolutely editorializing. Yeah, it's like I said. The account has always been about me and what's on my mind, right? And so I'm living through that era just like everybody else is, and so watching the news and watching things happen. And so as I watch things happen and I watch the news, I will comment on those things in my only social media platform that I use and that I have. I mean, this is my social media platform. When I'm following you. I'm looking at I'm looking at these things. I'm reading this, right? Like this is a real thing. Like I'm not I don't follow just to pretend. This is what I'm doing. So, but yes, I'm commenting on the world. Of course.
Okay. So, and we follow each other, and I don't know exactly why you followed me. I think I probably tweeted like a Shakespearean quote reply in addition to one of your things. And so I wasn't, I didn't know if it was like a team of people, doing this or a bot or something. So when you followed me, I sent it around to some of my friends. They're like, "Well, look at this! Shakespeare's following him now." So, but it's interesting. It's interesting that seeing it as your personal account.
So you would have done something that caught my eye. That's how that would have happened. So you would have tweeted something that I saw that either somebody retweeted or you interacted with the account in some way, and I saw it for that reason. But that's how that. I mean, I was trying to remember, and I don't remember that exactly one. But that's how that would have happened. I will follow accounts that interest me.
I'll
follow accounts that interest me, and accounts that definitely have things to do with theater and Shakespeare. I'll follow those automatically always, and I really try to do the ones that are associated with schools. Especially for younger folks. Always try to follow those and promote the stuff that they're doing too.
Okay,
I turned down a lot of promotion requests, but I often I'll promote those.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, you're not advertising those like weird mood lights that some company sells that if they have a viral tweet, they'll pay you $35 to put, advertise their crappy product or whatever. Right. So, okay, well, I'm honored that you did follow me. And yeah, probably was something where you tweeted some beginning of a line and I just either replied or quote tweeted it with the end of the line, something along that that seems like the sort of thing I would have done. Okay. And then, occasionally, sometimes there's people who have a name that happens to occur in Shakespeare. And so you'll tweet something like that. And then the word Trump, just as a noun appears in Shakespeare, I assume tens of thousands of other words. So there's that. Okay. So when you're talking about not giving the larger context or the line, so I was, looking at your feed and you're having a pinned tweet from January 5th, and it says, "I do spy a kind of hope." And so seeing that, it's like, oh, that's a nice line. And I assume you tweeted that after the Georgia, so it was the day before the Capitol insurrection, storming the Capitol, whatever.
The day right before, right?
And so it would have been the day after we realized that the Democrats won both Georgia seats. So I assume that was sort of that may have been what you're thinking of. Or at least that's maybe why
I imagine that probably had something to do with that. I think that was probably the moment when the vote counts looked incontrovertible.
Okay. That makes sense. So that I was just thinking, well, that's a nice line. I do spy a kind of hope. It's sort of that ambiguity, a kind of hope. That's very Shakespearean. And I was like, so what is this from? So I googled it, and maybe you don't remember, but I have it here. So it's Friar Lawrence. He
it's
says,
from where?
Friar Lawrence from Romeo and Juliet. He says, "Hold, daughter, I do spy a kind of hope, which
the irony
execution, as that is desperate, which we could prevent. If rather than marry County Paris, thou hast the strength of will to slay thyself, that it is likely thou wilt undertake a thing like death to hide away the shame that copest with death himself to escape from it. And if thou darest, I'll give thee remedy." So okay, so it's this lovely little line, "I do spy a kind of hope," but who's being said by Friar Lawrence, the guy who screws up royally and is such a dunce that he causes the the death of both Romeo and Juliet, and the hope he spies is like his plan that backfires. So with Shakespeare, it's never simple. It's like there's always like multiple. So not given the context, there's always you can impute the meaning to it, but even so one context would be like in the play, Friar Lawrence turns out like he screws it up so much. And but at the same time, like just the little phrase itself is so lovely, and so that's what that further goes back to the sort of the greatness of the work. I think it's like
it is such a good point, and that you're making, and now that you read everything to me in context, I remember this, and I remember reading, of course, all of that follows, and thinking to myself, in the original context, this is terrible. This line is not what I'm saying at all, but taken out of context, it is. And this is so often true of some of the best lines. Like some of the greatest lines are said. Iago has some of the best lines in Shakespeare, and he's using them for pure and utter evil at every turn. But so many of them are just great lines that they're great to quote, and taken out of context, they're fantastic. And this is so often the case. The worst people or the worst situations have some of the best lines, which is another reason why I keep them out of context.
Right. And, so what that brings to mind within Shakespeare is the Polonius's famous speech to Laertes with his advice, neither a borrower nor a lender be. And he ultimately says, "To thine own self be true." And so this is like printed on T-shirts and magnets. And I actually got my mother when I visited England and went to Stratford one time, and I got her a magnet from the gift shop that said, "To thine own self be true." But when you remember, but then so that's like the sort of the high school reading is like, oh, here's some good advice. But then you remember, oh, Polonius is also like this huge dullard, moron, and and then you learn that like, oh, Shakespeare, he was a lender. Like that was how he made some of his money, was lending money. And then you think about like, to thine own self be true. Well, like one of the themes of Hamlet is like what is the self? Like how can you be true to something that possibly doesn't exist? So it just takes on all these extra meanings in addition to being like the most famous list of literary advice, but maybe it's not meant, maybe all of it is horrible advice. And like one of the things is like, don't become good friends with anyone because they might betray you. And that's sort of obviously like sort of bad advice, but when the famous line, "To thine own self be true," might even be bad advice because it's impossible. So yeah, this is just
right.
The layers here are complex and
well, yeah. And that's part of the idea. Like if like, what I hope is true about this account is that it does things like that. Like that a lot of people are going to like the stuff just because it, you take it at face value and then that's it. Right. And that's great. But a lot of other people are going to think about the context or think about it a little more deeply. And that's even better. I mean, that is what I hope is going on. So anyway, I'm happy to hear that it is, at least with me. Yeah.
So there's multiple levels at which one can enjoy Shakespeare and this account, which consists of Shakespeare. And, everyone reads Romeo and Juliet, or most Americans read Romeo and Juliet in high school. And it's like, oh, it's so romantic. And then like, if you reread it as an adult, you're like, these are children. And like, they're like acting totally insane. And, so there's always, it's like inexhaustible. Okay. But actually I was thinking, are there times where you have a thought or there's something in the news or you're looking for something and then you can't find it? Like, are there things that there's no appropriate Shakespearean quote, or there's been a time where you're looking for something and you couldn't find it?
Yeah, I've been stymied a few times, but usually it's on very specific type stuff. So sometimes I'll be looking for things that are um, more akin to names and things like that I'll be thinking about and wanting to comment on and can't. I actually have an example right now that I can give you, and I'm going to get his name wrong, and I'm going to feel bad about that. But so the actor who portrays Saul Goodman, who plays Jimmy, Bob, I can't remember.
Bob Odenkirk, yeah.
Thank you. I knew you'd come up with it. Bob Odenkirk, he just, whatever. Clearly I'm extremely online Twitter, right? So I knew that he had a little heart scare or whatever, and then it was not a big deal and he was fine. And I was like, oh, I would love to say something about that. And I couldn't find it. There was nothing that I could find that tied it in. So I just moved on, which happens. Sometimes, not often. Usually I can find something. Usually I can find something to express what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. And are you using do you want to reveal this secret? Are you using there's an MIT search engine or something, or the Rhyme Zone also has a search engine of Shakespeare?
Yeah.
What are the mechanics if you want to share this trade secret?
MIT's has a lot of errors in it.
Really?
Actually.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah. And
of course, there's multiple versions of a lot of these texts, and so sometimes there's
absolutely.
It's unclear what actually is meant. And the most famous one is this 2-2 sullied flesh versus the solid flesh.
Right.
It seems like that exists in both versions. And yeah, as he's talking, he wants it to melt and resolve into a dew or whatever. And
right.
Is the flesh sullied or is it solid? Well, I guess we'll never know.
Yes. And there's another one too that it's in the I can't think of it off the top of my head, but anyway, yes, you're right about that. But these were not that. These were actual typos in the text.
Mm-hmm.
Things that were wrong. So I don't use that. Yes, of course I use an online, or I use a something that I can search. I don't know, and I always have. I mean, that's how these things have been around for a long time. But yeah, sure. Back in the day, Rhyme Zone and this MIT one were my go-to things. My secret sauce now, there is actually an iPhone app that's fantastic that has the complete works, and it's mostly error free, which is good. There may be a couple in there. Somebody just called me out on misspelling a word or I get called out whenever there's something, I mean, it's Twitter, of course. Yeah. People live for this stuff, right? If I get something wrong, or if I use the American spelling instead of the British spelling, that used to be a thing that people would correct me on all the time.
Okay.
The
spelling, I mean, because the Shakespeare's spelling is not consistent, because spelling wasn't really
not at all. Absolutely.
Back then, so
yeah, it really is a silly. I mean, your point is great. It really is a silly thing to be teasing this account for, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you want me to use the original spelling, okay, no one would be able to really read it or understand it.
Yeah, I think he spelled or at least his name was spelled multiple ways, in the press at the time, sometimes with an X or something. So yeah, it was just
right. Yeah,
it was a different era.
I've read that in all of the writings where he signed his name, he never signed it the same way twice. I don't know if that's overstating it or not, but I've read that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just the first dictionary didn't exist yet, so there wasn't a codified spelling of things. So yeah, do you have a favorite play to quote from?
Oh, probably. I mean, I probably quote from Hamlet more than I quote from anything else. Mm-hmm. There's just a lot of really good stuff and a lot of really good lines in there. But it depends, it always depends on what really suits whatever I'm looking for at the moment. Mm-hmm. I will quote from anywhere that's got what I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. But if I'm sometimes I'll just want to quote a line because it occurs to me and I think about it and I like it and I want to see it out there again. Like that happens too. Mm-hmm. And so then that'll be the works that I'm more familiar with, which would include, of course, Hamlet, because everybody's familiar with Hamlet, right?
Right.
Some of the other ones, but yeah.
And there's an old joke that is, there's an old about an old woman, and her whole life people have been telling her to read Hamlet, and she never wanted to do it. Then finally, her son convinces her when she's 90 years old to read Hamlet, and she reads it, and then he says, "Well, what did you think of it?" And she says, "It's just a book of quotes." Because it's so much from there has
right.
Entered into this is like a dozen movies that
absolutely
the undiscovered country and what dreams may come, and that's just like the same. That's the same speech. So yeah, there's a lot of really famous stuff in there. So that makes sense. Do you have a favorite line or a favorite soliloquy or anything like that?
I don't really know that I do have a favorite line or a favorite soliloquy. It really depends on my mood, it just depends on my mood and what I'm thinking about. That's really the most honest answer. I don't have one. There are works, of course, that I love more than the others. That's for sure. Just like everybody, but not a favorite line. I don't think.
What do you know? What your most popular tweet has been in terms of retweets and likes? And
I think I do, and I'm going to back up for a minute too, and say that there, one of the sonnets that, and I'm going to botch it, but I'm going to botch it. It's about an older couple, and she lies with her, and I lie with her, and she with me, and it's a pun on laying together in bed, but also lying to one another. I think it's the one, my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun.
Oh yeah.
Her, that's the one. I love that sonnet because it speaks so much about real relationship and real love between people, that it's not about the beauty really, it's about the feelings that you have for each other, and it's sort of in spite of the beauty, but we still tell each other how wonderful we are, and we're just lying to one another, but we both love it. Anyway, I love that. So yes, that is one of my favorites of sonnet. But you started asking me another question.
What has proved most popular? Do you know?
Oh, yeah. So when Prince died, it was that hit me hard, of course. The obvious quote, you could probably, if you don't know what I quoted, you could probably just do it right here. What do you think? What did I say?
Well, I'm guessing it's what Horatio says when
yes.
Hamlet dies. That would be my guess.
Of course. Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing me to thy rest.
Right.
And that was probably the greatest hit, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. And and it's even aside from the consonants of Prince the human, and the artist formerly known as and the Prince Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark. Yeah, that's it's a good line. Okay, well, let's see. Do you have so how do you so when things so let's say that there is something in the news and you want to comment upon it. Are you looking for the word, or how do you approach that if there's something happening in the news and you want to comment on it through the account?
Exactly. Once again, the secret sauce. So it depends. Sometimes I know I've been doing this long enough, so sometimes I'll know what I want to say. I'll know the quote that I want to use, and I'll just look for that, right? Like that happens more and more often. But yeah, other times I'll cue in on a word and look for it, and read how it's used, and go through the canon with that in mind, and that can be a tough thing to do, right? Because the words are going to show up a lot, and so you got to kind of if you can, so sometimes I try to narrow it down in my searches as well to try to make it so that it's a little more targeted to what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's really that. It's me either remembering or looking and seeing if that's what strikes me.
Are there, since you've been doing this project for a long time, are there things that have changed in how you view Shakespeare or individual plays or lines or something? Or are there new things that, there's probably new thoughts you've had related to Shakespeare. There's the things that are like, oh, I didn't realize this, or I thought about it this way, and maybe it's more like this way.
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, I would say that to some extent, this put me on a path to learning a lot more than I ever would have before, right? I mean, I had read Shakespeare before. I actually acted in one Shakespeare play way back in the day, So I've done that. And I still quote that character often because that's one of my favorite characters. But I would say, so for example, I got exposed to other works that I wouldn't have been exposed to other times, and I'm going to pull one out. Richard II is just a really fun. It's a really fun work, and there's just a lot to it that I love, and the whole scene where Richard is messing with Bolingbroke when he's giving up his throne. That whole scene is just so good and so powerful, and I love to read it. I love to watch it. It's just really fun. I never would have probably ever seen that had I not done this. I'm a lover of nonfiction. I like to read nonfiction. So I've read several books about Shakespeare now as because I've been inspired by this. So I've done some of that. And I've also done a little bit of research because one of my rules has been I'm nominally only supposed to quote Shakespeare, right? And I know that as soon as I say that, I'm stepping into an absolute minefield because what does that mean? You're only quoting quote Shakespeare. I know that. I mean, I know that now in a way that I didn't know that before. Is one of the things, but many of the works are believed to be collaborations now. Of course, is a thing that people talk about. But anyway, one of the reasons that this became important to me was that Sir Thomas More is an Elizabethan work that is believed to be partly penned by Shakespeare. I think one of the scenes is believed to be done by Shakespeare because they have a written version of it, and they believe that handwriting is his in one portion of it. But anyway, it's a really powerful scene that I love. And I will quote that, and I'll quote from it and have. But I don't quote any other portions of the play because they're not Shakespeare, in my mind.
Right. Yeah.
I have just opened myself up to being attacked by scholars across the world. So welcome. I welcome your hate. Bring it.
Right. And so in some of I guess the later plays especially, and then maybe a couple of the early ones, there's scholarly dispute about whether Shakespeare wrote the entire thing, or maybe it's more there's scholarly agreement that this was a collaboration. And there's Middleton, is that one of or Middle something? But and maybe a guy called Gower, who are just like basically forgotten playwrights from that era, except they happen to, Shakespeare happened to write the two Noble Gentlemen. Is that what it's called? this obscure late play.
Right.
Half of it is by this guy Gower or whatever, right? And half of it is by Shakespeare. And
Two Noble Kinsmen.
That's what it is. Yep. Right. I was conflating that with Two Gentlemen of Rhoda, which is, so I think some people think is the first play he ever wrote.
Right.
And yeah, so that's probably, there'll never be a solution, or we'll never know for sure about some of that stuff. And then there's this whole authorship thing, which we don't get into, but there's, people think that Shakespeare was always someone different, or was like a group of people or something. Right. And there's plenty of people who believe that sort of conspiracy stuff. So let's see. Do you have any favorite we're talking about the text primarily. Do you have any favorite like productions or movie versions or artistic interpretations of Shakespearean works that you've enjoyed?
Yeah, I'm gonna trot out a couple of them. First, I'm gonna draw everyone's hate by saying that I loved the Romeo plus Juliet. What was that? Guillermo del Toro, right?
No, it's Baz Luhrmann. Yeah,
but yeah, in the '90s.
I think that there's been a shift. Well, I don't know. Maybe like the stuffy shirt types didn't like that.
Yeah.
In 1997 or whatever. It came out, I think, when I was a freshman in high school, and that was the year we were reading Romeo and Juliet. So it was like it hit perfectly at that time for me. I think a lot of people now recognize that is actually a really good interpretation. Does a lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah, I love it, and my feeling on this is that let's make it accessible. Let's make it. I mean, all the language is really still there, which is really what people should be most fussed about. But it makes it so alive and relevant, and it just made so many people read or not read, but get exposed to the play and what it's really about. To your point, although I think they glossed over some of the parts there. She didn't look, what is it, 13 or something? However,
yeah, I think 12. She's at some point it said that she's 12.
12. Okay, you're right. It's terrible. So they glossed over some of that, but anyway, but you get exposed to the work, and I thought it was fantastic. I am a fan of the Hollow Crown series. I think they've done a really nice job. If you're not familiar with them, but it's I think it's a BBC production where it's all of the histories, and so they started with the latter half. So they did. Richard
II was the first one they did. I think chronologically.
They did those three, I think, second. So they did Richard II, and then they did Richard. Then they did the interim one. I don't know. I should know these in order. And then they did. Henry the Fourth.
Yeah, it's the two Henry the Fourth plays, and then Henry the Fifth.
Right.
And then there's the Henry VI trilogy, and then there's a Henry the Eighth also.
They didn't do that one. They didn't do that one, but they did. But they did a lot of. But they did those, and they had just really good. They were just cast really well. They had really. I think they had really great actors in them, and they're a lot of fun. I liked those.
But Richard III is the chronological end of those like 8, I think.
Yes, I think you're right. But you're right. So you're probably right that maybe Richard Richard II was the first one they did. You're probably absolutely right. I think you are.
Yeah, that was the one. It's the actor. He's in the Bond movies. He plays Q in the new Bond movies. I can't remember that actor's name, but I
can't remember it either. He's good.
He's Richard. Though. He's very good. And then in Henry IV, it's the guy who is now Loki. Is right. Al.
Yes.
Is it Jeremy Irons who was?
No, it's not Jeremy Irons.
Is that a different version?
Yeah.
But they have very good British, thespians doing all these roles. So my experience with that is that Harry the Fourth Part 1 is one of my favorite plays, and I thought that I didn't like the Falstaff interpretation in Harry the Fourth Part 1. I thought they underplayed the comedy, and it's hard to do because Harry the Fourth Part 2 has these tragic aspects,
right?
So it's hard to make it really. There's a lot of comedy in Harry the Fourth Part 1 that you can bring out, but then if you're doing both parts of them, it's a little weird that. In the end, like Hal rejects Falstaff. So anyway, but the guy who played Falstaff he's like maybe one of the most renowned like Shakespearean actor of his generation, but I can't remember British actor at least. I can't remember his name though. But he's done a lot of the premier roles in the canon. Yeah. But I can't remember his name. But
can't either.
Yeah, but yeah, so that is, and they certainly it's like high production value also sort of thing.
Absolutely, they're really good. And then on the stage, without giving, I guess, too much away that my accent hasn't already given away. I had a history of seeing productions in Stratford, Ontario, and I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure, but they're.
I have not, but there's a famous like summer festival there, right? That's
right. Yep. Yep, the Shakespeare Festival, been going on for many, many years, and they were just amazing. And I vividly remember going to see. I think it was the first play I saw. They did a production of Macbeth, and to a teenage kid, they have all the bells and whistles. The lightning's flashing, and then the ghosts are appearing and disappearing, and it was if you ever wanted to hook somebody, you're looking for a gateway drug to Shakespeare, that was it. So it really pulled me in. It was great. Loved it.
Yeah, that's cool. I used to live in Rochester, New York, which is not all that far from where that is, although you have to, go around Lake Ontario, but I never actually made it to that festival, but maybe someday I'll go check it out. And there's plenty of work that is not a literal or like text loyal to the text adaptation, and one would be the West Side Story, which is being remade for some reason by Steven Spielberg, and then there's a Macbeth that one of the Coen brothers directed without the other Coen brother.
I saw that.
Denzel Washington playing Macbeth.
I saw that. I'm really interested.
I definitely want to check that one out. Yeah, so it's constantly continuing. Let's see. I don't know if I have many other questions. I mean, are there other things that you want to say now that you're able to speak publicly for the first time?
I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, the only other thing that sort of occurred to me as I was, thinking about this and thinking about talking to you was, it's kind of, because you asked about what, am I commenting on stuff? Am I commenting on the world? And, we talked about that already. And, it occurred to me as I was reflecting on this that I'm not really just stealing, Shakespeare's lines, that in a way I'm also stealing his shtick, because, that was to some extent what he was doing too. I mean,
for sure. Yeah.
These plays, there were a lot of veiled references to things that were happening in, contemporaneously, and, or they were being written to flatter, the people in power. One example, and the only reason I can cite this is, I was reading a book about it, and shout out to The Year of Lear, which is the book that I was reading. But there's a scene in Macbeth where where Macbeth asks the witches to tell him the future. What do you mean I'm not going to be king? And Banquo is going to, tell me more about that. And I'm utterly paraphrasing. And then there's I think it's a stage direction, but it's an incredibly long and detailed stage direction where it talks about all of the things that come out, and it's a whole line of kings, and they're holding, things that are like indicating that this person is a monarch of France and a monarch of England and of Scotland and of Ireland. And it was, sort of a, it was, what I read was this was a way of sort of, sucking up to King James at the time and saying, this could be you, you are the great, he's already the uniter, right, of Scotland and England, but you could be the great uniter of all of the kingdoms. So anyway, that's.
There's there's various stuff in Macbeth. One is that's related to what was happening in England at the time. One is that King James I of England was like obsessed with witchcraft.
Yes,
and wrote a book about witchcraft, and some of the stuff like that the witches do is like related to that book. The part with like Banquo's descendants eventually like attaining this lineage of royalty. Yeah, that seems like he was. Sucking up to the king or something, which
absolutely
sensible thing for someone to do back then.
So when people are saying what's the context of your quote in this play, well, the plays themselves had a context back in the day too, right? And so that's just all I'm doing. I'm just doing the same thing. I'm just like people say he stole his stories. Okay, great. I'm stealing his words and putting them into the context of today. So I'm kind of doing the same thing, but please don't think I'm comparing myself because in the literary genius sense, because that is not true. I'm just the modern day thief.
Right. And so there's that saying that I don't know. I think it's attributed to various people that like good artists borrow, great artists steal.
Right.
And I think for the vast majority, and maybe all but like a small handful of the plays, there's some previous source
Right.
that he just took
Right.
the plot or the characters or something from, and then
Right.
redid it
And said it better than anybody else.
Yeah. So yeah, he was there wasn't copyright back then or anything, and he was just stealing from all sorts of other sources. And so the stuff is going to be repurposed and reinterpreted and understood in different ways as long as people are still reading stuff. So let's see. That might be a good place to end it.
Sounds fine.
I already used the not of an age but of all timeline, but it's true. So okay, well, Will, whoever you are, thank you for coming on. So the if people want to follow you, it's WWM_Shakespeare. And why is that, by the way? Maybe that's the last question. Why are there two W's there?
I can't believe I almost got out of this without you asking me that. I can't even believe that. It was a typo.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it should have been WM. And it just shows you how, this was not a big thing when I started. I just did this on a lark. It was never going to be a thing. And there you go. So lesson learned. Even when you're doing that, pay a little bit closer attention. But it was a typo that was also like a sort of I don't know how to say it, a Freudian slip, because the acronym WWM at the time had a significance to me at that moment. And so I'll just leave you with that little tantalizing tidbit. So it was a mistake, but it was a mistake because that was a thing that was also on my mind.
That's interesting. Years ago, I met a woman who told me, and I believe this is true, that she was a very, very early person on Twitter, and she was in college, and she and her friends all grabbed the names of like celebrities and stuff. So she grabbed, this was like in 2006 or something. So she grabbed Tina Fey, and so she ran the Tina Fey account early on. This is before there was blue checks, and so there were people who maybe thought she really was Tina Fey, and she was tweeting out silly stuff. And then at some point, once Twitter started taking off and the actual Tina Fey came in, and it was like, this is not me. Twitter like took
it away.
Tina Fey away from her and gave it to the real Tina Fey, and they gave her like fake Tina Fey or something like that. They transferred all of her stuff over to there, but she lost. She had like tens or hundreds of thousands of followers at one point. They all went to the actual Tina Fey. So I was thinking, like, you deserve the @Shakespeare more than the whatever bozo runs that that particular account. But Twitter is not run according to like a sense of justice or anything like that. Just looking at the site briefly will tell you that much. So
I know we're wrapping up, but I did think at one point about you can change handles, and that's a thing you can do on Twitter. And I thought about it at one point, but at that point there was already links in places, and I had there were people that had written up about it and things, and I just thought, what, and it makes it distinctive. So whatever, it's whatever. That's where I am. I'm never going to change it now.
Okay, so once again, WWM_Shakespeare. That's the account, and the links to that will be below. So thank you for doing this. I think you were a little hesitant at first, but because you like maintaining your anonymity, and that's understandable. But I appreciate you coming on and talking about this stuff, and I'm always happy to talk about Shakespeare. So hopefully people got something out of this, and some more people will follow your account, and I think that'll be good all around. So thank you once again, and thank you to our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. I had fun.